The psychology of men who realize time is running out. Most men don't panic when they realize time is running out. They change. Some suddenly quit the career they spent 30 years building. Some disappear into silence. Some begin risking everything they once protected. From the outside, it often looks irrational. But psychologically, something very specific is happening. A shift that changes how a man sees time, meaning, and the rest of his life. And once this shift begins, the same man can make decisions he would never have made 10 years earlier. In this video, we'll break down what really happens in the mind of a man when he realizes his time is limited. You'll understand why some men become calmer and wiser, why others start taking dangerous risks, and why many quietly withdraw from the world around them. Most importantly, you'll see which psychological path this realization usually creates, and what it might mean for your own life. Because the moment a man understands that time is no longer endless, the rest of his life begins to change in ways most people never expect. So the real question is not if this realization comes. The real question is, what kind of man does it turn you into? And the answer might be very different from what you think. When time suddenly becomes real. For most of life, time feels distant and abstract. You know that life is limited, everyone knows that. But when you are younger, the future feels wide open. There is always time to start over, time to change direction, time to fix mistakes. So many things get postponed. I'll do it later, one day, when things calm down. But sometime after 50, something changes. Years start moving faster. 5 years no longer feel like a long period of time. 10 years suddenly look short. Psychologists describe this as a shift in time perspective. When we are young, the brain focuses on expansion, building a life, exploring possibilities, accumulating experiences. But later in life, the mind begins to move toward evaluation. Instead of asking, "What can I still build?" the question slowly becomes, "What actually mattered?" This shift can be uncomfortable because many men start noticing something unexpected. Some of the things they spent decades chasing no longer feel as important as they once did, and that realization can be deeply unsettling. Why some men start taking big risks. One reaction to this realization is bold action. Many men who spent decades being cautious suddenly start making surprising decisions. They change careers, move somewhere new, end relationships that no longer feel right, start businesses they once thought were too risky. To people around them, it can look impulsive. But psychologically, something very logical is happening. Earlier in life, decisions are guided mostly by security. You protect your career, your financial stability, your reputation. Because you believe there is still plenty of time ahead. But when time starts feeling limited, the brain begins to calculate differently. The question shifts from, "What if this fails?" to, "What if I never try?" And that difference is powerful. Studies on regret consistently show something interesting. People rarely regret the risks they took. They regret the opportunities they ignored, the conversations they never had, the chances they postponed, the paths they were too afraid to explore. So when a man realizes time is limited, hesitation often disappears. not because he becomes reckless, but because the cost of doing nothing suddenly feels higher than the risk of change. Why some men become quieter. But not every man reacts by taking risks. Some react in the opposite way. They become quieter. They talk less, argue less, withdraw from social noise. To others, this can look like distance or isolation. But something else is often happening. Perspective. After decades of life experience, many men begin to see patterns more clearly. They recognize how many conflicts are repetitive. Office politics, pointless arguments, social drama that leads nowhere. When time feels unlimited, people tolerate these things more easily. But when time begins to feel precious, patience for trivial problems decreases. So instead of fighting every battle, some men simply stop participating. They become selective about where they invest their energy, and that quietness is often misunderstood. It is not always loneliness. Sometimes it is clarity. The invisible reevaluation of life. Another powerful process begins internally. Many men start reflecting on the story of their own life. They revisit earlier choices, the career they chose, the opportunities they rejected, the relationships they invested in. Psychologists sometimes call this process a life review. It is a natural stage that often appears later in adulthood. The mind begins asking deeper questions. Did I live according to my values? Did I become the person I hoped to be? Were the sacrifices worth it? For some men, this reflection creates peace. They see that their life, even with its mistakes, had meaning. But for others, the reflection reveals something harder. A gap between the life they imagined and the life they actually lived. And that gap can create powerful emotions. Sometimes regret, sometimes motivation, sometimes the sudden desire to change the direction of the years that remain. Why priorities change so fast? Another noticeable shift happens in priorities. Things that once seemed extremely important begin losing their power. Status, recognition, competition. These motivations slowly fade. Instead, attention begins moving towards something simpler. Peace, freedom, time with people who matter. Psychologists describe this shift as selective emotional investment. When people believe they have unlimited time, they spread their energy widely. They chase achievements, opportunities, and external rewards. But when time feels limited, the brain becomes more selective. It begins prioritizing experiences that create emotional meaning. That is why many men later in life start valuing different things, not because they lost ambition, but because their definition of success changed. The most dangerous reaction. However, there is also a darker reaction. Some men interpret the realization of limited time as a signal that everything is already decided, that it is too late to change careers, too late to rebuild relationships, too late to pursue something meaningful. This belief can quietly freeze a person in place. Because once someone believes change is impossible, they stop trying. But the truth is often different. 10 years is still a long time. 15 years can transform an entire life. Many of the most meaningful changes people make happen later than they expected. The danger is not limited time. The danger is believing that time no longer matters. The quiet turning point. For many men, this stage becomes a turning point. Not a dramatic crisis, not a breakdown, but a slow internal shift. They begin asking questions they ignored earlier in life. What truly matters to me? What kind of life do I want from here? What is worth protecting, and what is not? These questions rarely have quick answers, but they change how a man moves through the world. He becomes more intentional, more aware of how he spends his time, and often more honest with himself. Because once the illusion of endless time disappears, something interesting happens. Clarity begins to appear. The difference between what matters and what doesn't becomes easier to see, and that clarity can completely reshape the years that remain. So now the real question becomes personal. When you look at your own life, what does this realization change for you? Does it make you more careful with your time, more honest about what truly matters? Or does it reveal something you have been postponing for too long? Because once a man understands that time is limited, the rest of his life is no longer automatic. It becomes a choice. This is the if verse, where psychology reveals the hidden patterns of human life. Subscribe. There's so much more to explore. Thank you for watching.